Across many lands and many centuries, people told stories about huge serpents and dragons. The oldest known stories go back more than 4,000 years in the ancient Near East. Later, dragon stories grew in China, India, Greece, and across Europe. They also formed in the Americas, Africa, and Oceania. Some dragons brought storms and rain. Others guarded temples or gold. Some marked borders and warned sailors. By looking at these stories, we can see what people feared, what they needed, and what they saw in their daily world. These tales grew from floods, droughts, wild animals, trade routes, war, and faith. The shapes were not the same from place to place, yet the idea of a mighty serpent or dragon kept returning. It helped explain nature, protect towns, and give rulers a strong sign to show on buildings and flags. The first dragon-like beings show up in the lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. In Babylon, more than 3,000 years ago, a story tells of Tiamat, a great sea being linked with chaos, and Marduk, the city's god, who defeated her. On the famous Ishtar Gate stood the Mushkushu, a long-necked snake dragon with scales and horns. In nearby lands, Hittite tales tell of a serpent named Iluyanka. In the Hebrew Bible, Leviathan is a huge sea creature. In ancient Egypt, the sun god faced a giant serpent called Apep each night. Priests read spells to keep the world safe. These beings were not only monsters, they also showed the struggle between order and disorder, and helped people make sense of floods, storms, and danger at the edges of cities and fields. In early China, dragon forms appear on Shang and Zhou bronzes, with curved bodies and sharp eyes. By Han times, about 2,000 years ago, dragons were tied to clouds, rivers, and rain. They had long bodies, deer-like horns, and no wings. People saw them as helpers who brought water to fields. Emperors used dragon symbols to mark their rule. The number of claws changed by era and rank. Roof tiles, eaves, and bridge posts carried dragon shapes to protect homes and public places. In Korea, the Yong guarded streams. In Japan, the Aryu was linked to temples near water. Across East Asia, dragons were not evil. They were strong, wise, and close to wind and rain, and they watched over boats, bridges, and wells. In early Vedic hymns from India, the storm god Indra defeats Vritra, a great serpent that held back the waters. Later Hindu and Buddhist stories tell of Nagas, serpent beings who lived in rivers, lakes, and under the earth. They were guardians of springs and rain, and also teachers or allies. In early Buddhist art, a Naga named Mukhalinda shelters the Buddha from a storm. As Indian faiths and art spread to Southeast Asia, Nagas appeared on temple stairways in Cambodia, Thailand, and Laos. At Angkor, great stone balustrades show many-headed Nagas. In Indonesia, water creatures called Makara decorate spouts and gateways. In the Philippines, stories tell of the Bakunawa, a huge serpent said to cause eclipses. These beliefs fit a climate of strong monsoons and river life, where water could bring rice or ruin. In Greek, the word drakon meant a large serpent with a piercing gaze. Greek stories set dragons as guardians of sacred places and rare goods. Apollo killed the serpent Python at Delphi before founding his shrine. Heracles fought the Hydra, a many-headed water beast, and the dragon Ladon watched the golden apples. Jason faced a sleepless dragon while seeking the golden fleece. Romans adopted and adapted these tales. Writers like Pliny the Elder described giant snakes in far lands, mixing reports with guesswork. The Roman army used a windsock standard called the Draco, taken from Dacian foes, to mark cavalry units. In art and on mosaics, serpents and sea beasts showed the reach of nature and fear of the unknown sea. These images suited a world of trade, warfare, and distant travel. In early medieval Northern Europe, people told of worms, long-bodied dragons that crawled or flew. The Norse story of Fafnir tells of a being who guarded treasure and was killed for it. The Old English poem Beowulf ends with a fight against a fire-breathing dragon that watches a burial mound. Viking longships had carved heads to scare off spirits and enemies at sea. In later Europe, St. George became famous for slaying a dragon, a tale that supported ideas of protection and faith. Carvings on churches and castle stones show scaled beasts at the edges of roofs and doors. In Slavic lands, the Zime or Zmiawy appears with many heads and storm powers. The Polish Wawel dragon and the Russian Zime Gorynik link towns to caves, hills, and sudden weather. These stories lived close to mounds, marshes, and dark forests. In Mesoamerica, the feathered serpent was a strong symbol. In central Mexico, he is called Quetzalcoatl, in Maya lands Kukulkan. He is linked to wind, learning, and rulership. At Chichen Itza, stone serpents line the steps where light and shadow form moving shapes on certain days. In the Andes, a maru is a double-headed serpent tied to water and the earth. In southern South America, some stories tell of great water beings that shape land and lakes. On the northwest coast, sea serpents appear in carvings tied to ocean life. In West Africa, Dahomey tales speak of Ido Huedo, a world serpent who supports land and sea. In Australia, many Aboriginal groups tell of the rainbow serpent, which made water holes and can reward or punish. In Aotearoa, New Zealand, the Maori speak of Taniwa, guardians of rivers and coasts. These stories fit lands shaped by floods, droughts, coasts, and reefs. Many ideas may explain why dragon stories appear in many places. People met large reptiles like crocodiles and giant snakes. Travelers saw monitor lizards across Asia, and on a few islands they saw very large ones we now call Komodo dragons. People found old bones of whales and prehistoric animals in cliffs and deserts. Without modern science, they gave them life with teeth and scales. In Central Asia, some think that beaked fossil skulls helped shape tales of strange beasts. Sailors saw giant fish and oarfish, and brought home news with fear and pride. Storms, floods, and droughts gave force to serpent stories tied to water. Trade across the Silk Road and by sea spread symbols from one culture to another, and local people shaped them to fit their own fields and cities. Some puzzles remain. We do not know how many stories began on their own, and how many came through shared roots. We also do not know the full meaning of some early images because scripts are lost or not yet clear. What we can see is how dragons became signs of power and care. Chinese New Year processions show dragon dances for luck. The red dragon marks the flag of Wales. In the Caucasus and Central Asia, carved serpent forms still guard doorways. Kings and emperors used dragons on robes, coins, and walls. Artists and makers put dragons on porcelain, stone, wood, and bronze for many centuries. In modern times, novels and films turned dragons into rulers of the sky or partners of people. Scientists use dragon names in biology, and space firms name engines after them. Tourists visit caves, walls, and gates tied to dragon tales. In short, dragons keep changing shape, and that tells us more about people than about monsters. They show how we picture danger, hope, and care for the land and the water that support life.